My dad made me his personal spy against my own mom. The first rule I ever learned was to watch my mother. The second was to report back to my father. He called it helping her be better, but I learned early on that his idea of helping and my idea of living were two very different things. It all started, or at least the first time I can clearly remember it starting, with a grilled cheese sandwich. I was 5 years old, sitting at our small kitchen table, my feet dangling high above the floor. The smell of melting butter and toasting bread was one of the best smells in the world. But then another smell joined it, acrid and sharp. Smoke. My mom let out a frustrated sigh and pulled the sandwich from the pan. The corner was black, a charcoal-colored triangle on an otherwise perfect golden square. I took one look at it and my lower lip started to tremble. Like any 5-year-old, a ruined lunch felt like the end of the world. The tears came hot and fast. That's when I heard it. The heavy, deliberate thud of my dad's footsteps on the stairs. It wasn't a normal walk. It was a stomp, each step a tiny earthquake that signaled an approaching storm. I saw the change in my mom's eyes instantly. The mild frustration over the sandwich vanished, replaced by a raw, primal fear that I was too young to understand but old enough to feel in my bones. She lunged toward me, her hand clamping over my mouth to stifle the sobs, but it was too late. Her panic only made me cry harder, the sound muffled and desperate against her palm. "Son, go to your room." My dad's voice was low and cold, devoid of any warmth. It cut through the kitchen air like a shard of ice. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled off my chair and fled, shutting my bedroom door behind me. But the door wasn't thick enough to block out the yelling. "I'm married, you're sorry, but and you can't even cook our son an effing meal." His voice was a roar, a force of nature that seemed to shake the whole house. My blood ran cold. Then I heard a different sound. A wet, heavy thud, followed by a gasp and a clatter like my mom had just collapsed onto the tile floor. Instinct took over. I threw my door open and ran back downstairs. She was on her knees, clutching her face. The area around her left, I was already beginning to swell, turning a dark, angry purple. I dropped to my knees beside her, my small arms wrapping around her neck, trying to hug the pain away. That's when my dad spoke again, his voice chillingly calm. "Son, no need to comfort this W. She got what she deserved." I tried to ignore him, to just hold on to my mom, but his next words stopped me cold. "Get off her, or you're next." From that day on, the rules became clear. I was to be his surveillance camera. My father encouraged me to report on my mother's every mistake, framing it as a way to help our family. A spot on the counter left unclean, a dish left in the sink, being 5 minutes late to pick me up from school. It was all ammunition. He told me it was my duty, the best thing for all of us. When I hesitated, when I tried to protect her, the discipline I'd only ever seen directed at her started turning on me. A smack for not telling him she'd burned the rice. A push into the wall for not mentioning she'd been on the phone with her sister for too long. My childhood became a tightrope walk of fear and betrayal. Sometimes, I try to keep her secrets. I won't tell him. I'd whisper, but she'd get this panicked look in her eyes. "No, do what your father tells you," she'd say, her voice firm, almost angry. And so I did. For years, I believed this was just life. I thought all families operated this way, that this undercurrent of violence and fear was the price of having a roof over your head. The illusion shattered when I was about 10. I was at my friend Jacob's house for dinner. It was the first time I'd ever been to a friend's house where both parents were still together, and I felt a weird sort of kinship with him, like we were in the same club. That feeling didn't last long. We were in the kitchen, and his mom served us hamburgers. I took a bite and noticed the bun was over-toasted, almost black on one side. "This is burnt," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I braced myself instinctively. I expected Jacob's dad to stand up, to see the fury in his eyes. I expected yelling, maybe a slap, or the sound of plates shattering against the wall. Instead, he just laughed. A deep, genuine laugh that filled the room. "She's always doing that," he said, winking at his wife. Jacob nodded, and his mom smiled, burying her face in her hands in a playful, embarrassed gesture. I just sat there, every muscle in my body tensed, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But it never did. Later, when I was leaving, both his parents gave me a hug goodbye. The walk home felt like I was moving through a dream. My head was spinning, trying to reconcile the warm, easy laughter in Jacob's house with the cold, silent tension of my own. When I opened my front door, it was like stepping into another dimension. The contrast was so stark it made me dizzy. My mom was curled up on the cold marble floor of the entryway, her forehead dotted with red, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. I could hear my dad's heavy snores from upstairs. He was already asleep. I went to her, my heart aching. She tried to push me away, muttering something about being fine, but I just told her to shut up while I got the first aid kit. "I'm sorry for not being there for you, Mom," I whispered as I cleaned the cut on her head. "I love you." She didn't say anything back, but her hand gripped my arm with a desperate strength, and she nodded through her tears. The next day, something inside me broke. I was done. I woke up with a cold resolve, ready to betray my father in the worst way I knew how. As soon as the final bell rang at school, I didn't walk home. I walked straight to the police station. I had no idea what the procedure was, so when a woman at the front desk asked me what I needed, I just let it all out in one long, breathless rush. The violence, the snitching, the constant fear, the emotional abuse. Her expression shifted from professional boredom to deep concern. She told me she would get a social worker to do an emergency home visit that very evening. An hour later, the social worker arrived. She was kind, and she promised that right after the visit, she would help me and my mom get to a safe place. But then she said something that made my heart skip a beat. "It is extremely likely that your parents will figure out it was you who called." I was terrified, but her promise of rehousing was a lifeline. For the first time, I felt a flicker of real hope. I went home with a secret smile on my face. At exactly 9 p.m., there was a sharp knock on the door. My mom opened it, and her face went ghost white. There stood the social worker, her professional gaze immediately taking in the fresh bruises and black eye my mom was trying to hide. I watched from the shadows of the living room as my mom stammered and called for my dad. I don't know what he said to that social worker. I just know he was charming, reasonable, and utterly convincing. In less than 10 minutes, she was apologizing for bothering us and walking back to her car. My dad had tricked her. He'd won. I tried to bolt from my room, but his hand shot out and grabbed my arm. His grip was like iron. "If you think what I did to your mother was bad," he whispered, his voice a low growl, "you should see how my dad taught me to treat snitches." I won't go into the details of what happened next. I just remember waking up on my bedroom floor the next morning, a universe of pain in every muscle. My mom had cleaned me up while I was unconscious. She sat on the edge of my bed, her eyes hollow. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but you need to understand. We can never, ever tell anyone again." He had convinced the social worker that her injuries were from a minor car accident and that I was a troubled kid who made up elaborate stories for attention. He had an answer for everything. School was hell. Every movement was agony. My teacher, Mrs. Kayla, noticed me wincing and asked if I was okay. I fell off my bike, I lied. The words came so easily. After school, I avoided Jacob, too scared of what my dad would do if he found out I was talking to anyone. That night at dinner was surreal. My dad acted as if nothing had happened. He talked about work, asked about my homework. Then he looked at me, a smile playing on his lips that made my stomach clench. "Son," he said calmly, "I think we need a new system. Your mother clearly needs more of our help." From then on, my job description changed. I wasn't just a surveillance camera anymore. I was his deputy. I had to report everything, every minor infraction, every single thing she did wrong. If I missed anything, we would both be punished. The next few weeks were a living nightmare. I became his perfect little spy. She took too long at the grocery store. I had to tell him. Dinner wasn't on the table at exactly 6 p.m. I had to tell him. And the worst part? My mom started policing me, too. She'd remind me to tell my dad things, her voice trembling, terrified that my silence would bring his wrath down on both of us. We were trapped in his sick game, two prisoners forced to guard each other. One day at school, I couldn't take it anymore. I hid in a bathroom stall and just broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. That's where a kid named Hugo found me. He was new, had just transferred a month ago. He didn't ask a bunch of questions or try to make me talk. He just sat on the floor outside the stall until I calmed down. After that, we started hanging out at lunch. He was normal. He talked about video games and movies, and for 45 minutes a day, I could almost forget the nightmare waiting for me at home. He became my lifeline. One afternoon, my sleeve rolled up and he saw the dark, finger-shaped bruises on my arm. I pulled it down quickly, but he'd already seen them. He didn't say anything right then, but the next day, he brought me an extra sandwich his mom had packed. The day after that, he gave me a cool, smooth rock he'd found by the creek. They were small gestures, but in my world, they were everything. A month after we met, I finally told him a little bit. Not everything, just that my dad got angry sometimes. He didn't freak out. He just listened. Then he told me his cousin had been in a similar situation and had gotten help. It was the first time I realized that my failed attempt with the social worker wasn't the only possible outcome. Maybe there was another way. I started finding excuses to stay late at school, study groups that didn't exist, projects that weren't due. My dad was suspicious, but when my grades started to improve, he eased up a little. Those stolen hours of freedom with Hugo were what kept me going. But I knew I was walking on a razor's edge. My dad had a way of knowing things. He'd show up at school unannounced, just to surprise me, his eyes scanning the cafeteria to see who I was with. At home, the surveillance was constant. My mom and I were still trapped. One day, Hugo asked if I wanted to come over to his house. I froze. The memory of Jacob's house, of what a normal family looked like, was a painful scar. I made up an excuse about having to help my mom. When I got home, my dad was waiting by the door, checking his watch. "You're 7 minutes late," he said. My stomach plummeted. I explained that a teacher kept us after class, which was true for once. He stared at me, his cold eyes dissecting my expression, before finally nodding. Go tell your mother dinner better be ready in 20 minutes. I found my mom in the kitchen, frantically chopping vegetables, her hands shaking so badly I was afraid she'd cut herself. I saw a fresh, ugly bruise on her wrist, a splash of purple and yellow against her pale skin. I didn't say anything. What was the point? I just started setting the table, the clink of plates deafening in the tense silence. That night, I lay in bed thinking about Hugo. I desperately wanted to see what a normal house felt like again, to sit in a living room without measuring every word. But I was terrified. After the social worker incident, he made it clear that any attempt to get outside help would end badly for both of us. I still had the scars to prove it. The next morning at breakfast, my dad announced he'd be home early. I want to hear about your day, son. Every detail. The way he said made my skin crawl. At lunch, Hugo noticed how quiet I was. Dude, you okay? He asked, pushing his chocolate milk toward me. He leaned in, whispering, is it your dad again? I looked around wildly, sure that someone would hear. Just drop it, okay? I snapped. He looked so hurt that I immediately felt guilty. He was my only friend. Sorry, I mumbled. Just a bad day. After school, I rushed home. My dad was on the couch, waiting. He patted the seat next to him. Tell me about your day. I recited my schedule like a robot, carefully editing out Hugo's name. It felt important to keep him secret, to have one thing in my life that my dad couldn't touch. Any new friends? He pressed, his eyes boring into me. My heart hammered against my ribs. Not really, just the usual kids. He nodded slowly, a small, knowing smile on his face. That's funny. Your mother tells me you've been mentioning someone named Hugo. My blood went cold. I'd forgotten I'd told my mom about him a few weeks ago, during a rare, quiet moment. Of course she had reported it. She had to. I said, trying to sound casual. He's new. We worked on a project. My dad leaned back, studying me. Invite him over sometime. I'd like to meet your friends. His smile was a mask. The thought of Hugo in my house, in my dad's presence, was horrifying. He's busy with sports and stuff. I lied. He let the subject drop, but I knew it wasn't over. My dad never forgot anything. That weekend, my punishment for not reporting that my mom had spent 10 extra minutes on the phone with her sister was to clean the entire garage. As I was moving dusty boxes, my dad came out with 2 beers. He handed one to me. I was 12. Drink, he said. It wasn't a request. I took a sip and nearly choked. It was bitter and sour. He laughed. Your grandfather gave me my first beer when I was your age. Told me it would make me a man. You want to be a man, don't you? I nodded, forcing down another sip, the foul taste coating my tongue. Men take care of their families, he said, his heavy hand clamping down on my shoulder, squeezing until it hurt. They make sure everyone follows the rules. That's what I'm teaching you. He went on and on about how my mom needed a firm hand, how women were emotional and disorganized, how lucky we both were to have him. I just stared at the concrete floor, feeling sick from the beer and his words. By Monday, I was a wreck. During gym class, when I was changing shirts, Hugo saw the dark purple bruises blooming across my back where my dad had shoved me against the wall. Dude, what the hell happened to you? He whispered, his eyes wide. Fell down the stairs. I muttered, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. He shook his head. That's not from falling. My cousin used to say the same thing. It was her stepdad. I felt a surge of panic. Just drop it. It's not like that. I slammed my locker, the sound echoing in the empty room. But he wouldn't let it go. After school, he walked with me, telling me how his cousin finally told someone and got help, how things could get better for me, too. Finally, I snapped. You don't understand. They already tried to help. It made everything 1,000 times worse. The words just tumbled out. I told him everything. The social worker, his dad's manipulation, the punishment. He looked shocked, but then his expression hardened with determination. Then we need better evidence, he said. My mom works at the hospital. She knows about this stuff. The thought of another adult terrified me. No, you can't tell anyone. Promise me, Hugo, he promised. But I could see the wheels turning in his head. That night, my dad was in a bizarrely cheerful mood. He brought home pizza, something that never happened. As we were eating, he dropped the bomb. I ran into the father of your friend, Hugo, today, he said casually, watching my reaction. Nice guy. Works at the bank. We're having them over for dinner this weekend. I nearly choked. What? How? He just smiled that dead-eyed smile. Small town, son. I thought it would be nice for you to have friends over, like normal families do. The message was clear. He was reminding me that he controlled every aspect of my life, even my friendships. Now, he was going to get his claws into Hugo's family. The next day, I frantically told Hugo he couldn't come, but it was too late. His parents had already accepted. He promised he'd try to get his mom alone to show her my bruises, but I knew it was hopeless. My dad would never let that happen. The dinner was a masterclass in deception. My dad was the perfect host, charming, funny, attentive. My mom, in a long-sleeved dress, smiled so much her face must have hurt. I sat next to Hugo, barely able to swallow my food, watching in horror as my dad completely won over his parents. Hugo's mom, Mrs. Campbell, was a nurse, just like he'd said. They were nice, normal people, and they had no idea they were dining with a monster. At one point, Hugo tried to bring up child abuse cases Mrs. Campbell had seen at work. My dad smoothly changed the subject and shot me a look that froze the blood in my veins. I kicked Hugo hard under the table, begging him to stop. Later, when we were in my room, Hugo whispered, "Your dad seems nice." "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure," I hissed back. "This is what he does. He fools everyone. You're making it worse." When the Campbells finally left, my dad closed the door, that same terrifying smile on his face. "Nice family," he said, though Hugo seems to have quite an imagination. His father mentioned he's been telling some concerning stories at home. My stomach dropped. He had already poisoned the well. He had preemptively painted Hugo as a liar to his own parents. "Go to your room," he ordered. "Your mother and I need to talk." I crept to the top of the stairs and listened. I heard him tell her that Hugo was a bad influence and that I was forbidden from seeing him again. The next day at school, Hugo was waiting for me. "My parents think you're making stuff up," he said, frustrated. "My dad said your dad told him you've had problems with lying before." "Is that true?" My dad's plan had worked perfectly. He had isolated me again. Over the next few weeks, he systematically dismantled my friendship. He told the school counselor Hugo was a bad influence and got us put in separate classes. He fed Hugo's parents a steady stream of lies about my behavioral issues. The final blow came when they found texts on Hugo's phone where I was describing what was happening. They didn't believe me. They saw me as a troubled kid dragging their son down. They banned Hugo from ever speaking to me again. My one lifeline was gone. At school, he would just look at me with sad eyes from across the cafeteria before turning back to his new friends. I was completely alone again, and my dad knew he had won. My mom seemed to fade even more, a ghost in her own home. One night, I overheard my dad telling her, "The boy's turning out just like you. Weak and pathetic." I heard a thud against their bedroom wall. The next morning, she had a fresh bruise on her cheek. He told me it was my fault for slacking on my reporting duties. That's when I decided that if adults wouldn't help me, I had to help myself. I started keeping a journal, writing down every threat, every slap, every night spent listening to my mother cry. I hid it under a loose floorboard in my closet. It was my one act of rebellion. But I got careless. I left it out one day, and my dad found it. He sat on my bed, calmly reading my deepest fears. "Quite the imagination you have," he said, almost amused. Then he slowly and deliberately tore the journal into pieces, letting the scraps flutter to the floor. "Who would believe you over me?" he sneered. "Clean this up, and if I ever find anything like this again, what happens to your mother will be your fault." Kneeling on the floor, surrounded by the fragments of my failed plan, I felt a surge of cold, hard rage. A written journal was too risky. I needed something he couldn't find and destroy. I needed proof that no one could deny. The next day, I approached Hugo. We hadn't spoken in weeks. "I need to borrow your phone," I whispered. To my surprise, he nodded. His parents had just gotten him a new one. He slipped me his old one under the lunch table. That night, I hid the phone in a heating vent in my room, and I started my own surveillance. I waited until my parents were asleep and took pictures of my mom's bruises. I held the phone against the wall and recorded my dad's quiet, menacing rants. I discovered the phone had a motion-activated recording feature, and I became an expert at hiding it. Behind books, in empty cereal boxes, taped under the dining room table. I captured him threatening my mom over a $10 grocery overage. I recorded him forcing me to recite her mistakes while she stood trembling. I even recorded him explaining his twisted philosophy to me, how a real man keeps his family in line by knowing everything. For 2 weeks, I collected a library of horror, all while playing the part of the good, compliant son. It made me sick, but I needed him to let his guard down. Then disaster. My dad saw Hugo and me talking briefly during a parent-teacher conference. The next day, he went to Hugo's parents and told them Hugo had stolen money from our house during the dinner party. It was a vicious, calculated lie, and they believed him. Hugo was grounded indefinitely, his phone confiscated. He wouldn't even look at me in the hallways anymore. But I still had the phone. I just needed to find the right person to give it to. Not the police, not the social worker. I needed someone my dad couldn't charm. And then I remembered Mrs. Kayla, my teacher, the one who had noticed my bruises and asked if I was okay. The one whose eyes held genuine concern. After class one day, my hands shaking, I approached her desk. "Mrs. Kayla, can I talk to you?" I showed her the phone. I watched her face go pale as she scrolled through the pictures, her hand flying to her mouth. "How long has this been happening?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "As long as I can remember," I told her. I tried to get help before, but he convinced everyone I was lying. Her expression hardened. "Not this time," she said, her voice filled with a steely resolve. She explained that she was a mandated reporter and had to report it, but she promised this time would be different. She would contact the original social worker, but she would bring the evidence, and she would make sure a police officer and a child advocate were involved. He couldn't manipulate a whole team. She kept the phone for safekeeping and told me to act completely normal. That week was the longest of my life. I played my part pretending everything was fine, every muscle in my body screaming with tension. On Friday, Mrs. Kayla pulled me aside. "It's happening tonight," she whispered. "The social worker, a police officer, and an advocate will be there at 7 o'clock. Just stay calm and tell the truth." I walked home that day with my heart hammering against my ribs. My dad was in a good mood, which only made it worse. He was whistling, talking about the pot roast my mom was making. I went to my room and stared at my homework, the numbers blurring on the page. Around 6:30, his phone rang. It was work. I held my breath as I heard him say, "Fine, I'll come in, but I won't stay long." A few minutes later, his car was gone. Mrs. Kayla must have arranged it. I raced downstairs. "Mom," I said urgently, "people are coming to help us." At 7 o'clock, her face drained of color. "No, you know what he'll do to us?" she whispered, terrified. "It's different this time," I insisted, explaining about the phone, the recordings, the pictures. I saw a tiny, fragile spark of hope flicker in her eyes. At exactly 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. On our porch stood Miss Deborah, the social worker from before. But this time, she was flanked by a police officer and another woman, a child advocate. Across the street, I saw Mrs. Kayla's car, and she gave me a small, encouraging nod. The next hour was a blur. I showed them the evidence. My mom wept silently as the recordings of my dad's voice filled our living room. The police officer, Officer Drew, took notes, his face a grim mask. Just as he was explaining what would happen next, we heard the sound of tires in the driveway. He was back. My blood turned to ice. "Stay calm," Officer Drew said, positioning himself between us and the door. My dad walked in and froze, his eyes taking in the scene. When his gaze landed on me, his expression hardened into pure fury. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. Officer Drew stepped forward. "Sir, we're here investigating reports of domestic abuse." Instantly, my dad's face changed. The rage vanished, replaced by a look of concerned confusion. The mask was back on. "There must be some mistake," he said smoothly. "My son has a history of making up stories for attention. You can even ask his therapist." "I don't have a therapist," I blurted out, my voice shaking. "That's another lie." "Sir," Officer Drew said, his voice firm, "we have photographic and audio evidence that suggests otherwise." For the first time in my life, I saw real fear in my father's eyes. He lunged toward me, his mask slipping. "What did you do?" he hissed. Officer Drew intercepted him. "Sir, step back now." My dad ignored him, trying to get to me. "You ungrateful little," he never finished. Officer Drew restrained him, cuffing his hands behind his back. "Ronald Johnson, you're under arrest for domestic assault and child endangerment." As they led him away, he was still yelling threats, but they sounded hollow now, the pathetic ramblings of a man who had lost all his power. That night, we went to a safe house. It was a small, plain apartment, but it was the first place I'd ever been where I could breathe. The next few weeks were filled with meetings and paperwork. My dad's fancy lawyer tried to paint me as a liar and my mom as unstable, but the evidence was undeniable. Hugo and his parents came to see us, horrified and apologetic after they saw the proof. "I knew something was wrong," Hugo said, punching my shoulder lightly. His mom, the nurse, had been one of the professionals who documented my mom's injuries for the court. My dad eventually took a plea deal to avoid a trial. He was sentenced to 2 years, though the prosecutor told us he'd likely be out in one with good behavior. It didn't feel like enough, not for a lifetime of terror. But watching him get led away in handcuffs, seeing him without any power over us, felt like a victory. Slowly, things started to change. My mom started therapy and got a job at a bookstore. The hollow look in her eyes began to fade. I started seeing a therapist too, learning to talk about things I had buried for years. 3 months after we left, we moved into our own apartment. It was small, but it was ours. My mom painted the living room a bright, cheerful yellow, a color my dad would have hated. I painted my room blue, like the sky. We bought mismatched furniture and hung pictures on the walls wherever we wanted. One night, I found her sitting on our small balcony, looking at the stars. I sat down next to her. "Are you okay?" I asked. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Not completely," she said. "Not yet, but I'm getting there." She put her arm around my shoulder. "We both are." And she was right. Last week, Hugo came over for a sleepover. We played video games and ate junk food until midnight. It was so perfectly, wonderfully normal. Every boring, ordinary moment feels like a miracle. I'm 13 now. It's hard to believe that just a year ago, I thought abuse was a normal part of life. Now, I know what a home is supposed to feel like. It's supposed to feel safe.